Om Shanti. Good evening. Warm welcome to Raj Yoga Essentials, where we get to take a very focused look at the basics of Raj Yoga. So, as always, it's nice to start with a bit of a reflection. So, I invite you to be seated comfortably, alert. Eyes can be open in a natural way, no strain. And feeling the body settle into the space. And starting to bring into my mind's eye the image of a cyclone, a storm, things swirling around in a cyclical way. But the self positioned in the calm center, the eye of the storm, the sense of being in a very calm, stable, centered state, and so many thoughts and activities swirling around on the outskirts of the mind. Just being the detached observer, not getting caught up or engaging in those circling tensions, but staying in that very calm, centered state, observing everything. Going very deeply into that experience of serenity, of being the observer, not thinking a lot at all, knowing that if my mind wanders even a little, it will get caught up in the storm. Thinking less, observing more. A state of depth and royalty and calm. Om Shanti. So there's so many entry points to exploring Raj Yoga. The name of the study itself, and again, it's a spiritual study that focuses on character or self-transformation. And the name of its study, the study itself, Raj Yoga. Raj means sovereign or ruler or king, and yoga means union or to link. So a relationship, a connection that restores the royalty or dignity of the human spirit, very much focusing on character. So if that feels like the right thing to you to focus on, then Raj Yoga could very much be for you. What Raj Yoga first does is it allows us to explore a bit of contrast. And one of the main contrasts we look at is the idea of working from the inside out, which is called responding, or working from the outside in, which is called reacting. And reacting means to react, perform the same action again. So there's a real focus on the self and the reference point. Which way am I operating, from the inside out or the outside in? And when we talk about operating from the outside in or reacting, looking at that cyclone in the reflection, I'm very much caught up in the periphery and affected by everything going on around me. So any stimuli can affect me and, if you will, govern over me, determine what I'm going to do. We sometimes think of the self as having all of these buttons inside, and different external stimuli can activate any of those buttons at any moment. We often say, "Oh, it pushed a button inside of me," and I react. And even this word reaction, we can rationalize, of course, try to defend why we react in a certain way. But the bottom line is, none of us really like the feeling of reacting. It's this sense that we've lost ourselves, we lost mastery over the self, a lack of self control that I was very much, um, if you will, controlled by the stimuli or situation outside that invoked that reaction, that push that button. And so, how to turn this around, right? We kind of know deep down this is not the way we want to live our life. This is not the path to happiness. This idea that I am so affected by everything going on around me. I'm just a walking reactor. And the best we can do is try and surround ourselves, try and control our outer world so that it pushes only the buttons I want to be pushed. And so, if we look honestly at our thoughts during the day, it's so much about controlling expectations, desires, impatience, frustration, all about these efforts. All of our energy is on trying to make the outer world be just the way I need it to be, so that I don't, whatever reactions come out of me are pleasing ones, if you will. And imagine a planet where every soul is trying to control the outer world the way that they want it to be. It's a completely impossible situation. So rather than trying to control the outer world and ignore the fact that I have all these buttons inside of me that are being triggered at any given time, why not try and learn to control the self? This, ironically, is true mastery of the world, where the world does not control you. Not that you make everything out there go the way you want. So, a very desire driven model, which the outside in is, but rather that I don't need anything out there to go in any particular way because it does not have control over me. I have control or mastery over the self. And whenever we are like that ourselves or see someone like that, we always say they have so much dignity, they have so much self respect, they have such self mastery. They are able to respond to situations rather than react or be controlled by situations, to respond in a very measured and deliberate and sensible way. And that's the key, actually, to happiness, is where I'm actually content with how I'm showing up in the world, how I'm responding. And that's going to require to turn that model around from the outside in to something where I'm living from the inside out, requires focusing a lot on the self and taking responsibility for the self, understanding the self, Today I had a little project which was looking at resilience. And in doing research, there's different qualities that are identified for people who have resilience. Resilience means that in the face of adversity or challenges, that you're able to move through them and retain your original stage, not be snapped by them, if you will, so they don't push your buttons. You're able to respond with dignity to adversity. And even though it stretches you, you don't break or snap. There's elasticity, flexibility, and easiness. And there's certain qualities that resilient people have. I found it fascinating because they match up so much with the objectives of Raj Yoga. And so one of the top ones, first off, very high on the list, was this idea of being able to problem solve. So again, to feel that there are capacities within the self, but also a certain level of sensibility, sense, such that I'm able to discern and decision making. But one of the main ones was self mastery or self control, to not get lost in a sort of emotional cyclone, but to be able to maintain self mastery and self control. There's a list of many others, but this was very high on the list. And so this requires making a decision to stop living from the outside in, to start taking responsibility for the self without any violence, of course. So through a method of understanding. And that's exactly what the study of Raj Yoga was designed to do. We call it a study. It's a body of knowledge that we study. It has subjects. And the subject matter, of course, is the self. So I'm studying the self, trying to understand the self so I can change from being a reactor into one that responds with dignity. And therefore, there is happiness or contentment in my life. So, this study of the self begins by having a clear idea of what the self is, who the self is. So, not only do we live from the outside in terms of our actions reacting, it turns out that we've started to live from the outside in terms of our identity of self, that we've put our sense of self into the outer world. We've created an identity of ourselves that's a patchwork of the external world. And when we say of the outer world, we actually include the body. So when we look at that sense of self identity, top of the list, we think we are the body. We think we are the relationships out there with other people. We think we are different possessions out there, again, in the external world. We think there are different positions or status, again, out there in the outer world. So we've really invested ourselves outside of ourselves, which sounds very ironic. So now we can begin to understand why we're living from the outside in, because ourselves are outside. It's as if there's a house and we're locked outside the house. And so, of course, we're completely at the mercy of what's going on outside. So, Raj Yoga, the study of the self, begins by putting the self back inside where I belong. I should be in here with the self. I'm not the body. I'm not the relationships. I'm not the possessions or positions. Not that I need to move away from any of them. I just don't need to identify my sense of self in them. I'll actually have a much healthier relationship with them when I stop thinking they are me. So, what does that leave? If I'm not any of these physical, external, temporary things, including the body, what does that leave? And of course, we are the being, the one who is using the body, the life force inside this body. And the term we use is soul. We're very enamored with the phrase human spirit, the greatness of the human spirit, the wonder of the human spirit, the tenacity and resilience of the human spirit. We love these phrases, but to just stop and think about what it means. What is that human spirit? That's me. So we're going to have a short reflection now to see if we can shift our sense of self back inside, this idea of becoming centered rather than being off center, our sense of self outside of the housing. We're going to see if we can center ourselves, that sense of self inside, within. So, again, sitting comfortably, arranging the body in a comfortable way so that it does not draw the attention. Eyes can be open. There's no reason I need to close my eyes to have a sense of self. So, eyes can remain open in a natural, relaxed way. And immediately becoming aware of this physical body and the outer physical world. I can see it all through the physical eyes. That's what the physical eyes are built for, is to see the physical world. Right now, this body is wearing glasses, but even if I take the glasses off, these physical eyes are really like a pair of glasses that we wear. And these glasses help me to bring into focus the physical world. But even without the glasses, those physical eyes simply are designed to see the physical. To wonder how they work, but there's limitations. They can only see the physical. So I can use these physical eyes to see the physical body and to see the elements, the aspects of my physical world, very deliberately looking around and seeing the body and all the elements in my physical environment. That's one side of the contrast. Then starting to ask the self, who is wearing these physical eyes? Who is observing through these physical eyes? I can observe the body, I can observe the physical realm, but the reverse is not true. The body cannot observe me, and all of these elements of my physical world cannot observe me. So, who am I, the one observing? The physical eyes are not able to see me, can only see what is physical. But that does not mean that that which the physical eyes cannot see does not exist. So I, the observer, the one who is thinking, the one who is feeling, I exist. I can experience my own activity of thinking and feeling and observing. I'm very real. I'm just not physical. I am the living being who is using this body. So there's now me, the soul, and then there is this body. And these are two separate entities. And feeling that sense of using the body as if it's a costume I wear to move through the physical world. I need it to exist in this physical world, to express, but I don't need it to exist. I myself can exist without the body, but the body cannot exist without me. This body becomes non-living when I am not in it. As long as I am in the body, this matter is living a living costume. But without me, the body falls down, beginning to experience this sense of self inside, behind the forehead where thoughts originate, as if I'm a very tiny, tiny point of life, of existence, of consciousness. Imagine the point of a tiny pin, how small that is. I am much, much smaller than that. I have no dimension, but I do exist. I have to become very quiet, focused, no other thoughts, to begin to grasp this sense of self. I'm so used to experiencing the gross through the physical eyes, to experience something so subtle as myself, this tiny living being that is me, just a point, an invisible point of living spiritual light energy. And when I am completely myself, in a very healthy state, the vibration I stabilize in is one of peace. Peace is the experience of well-being for me, the soul. It's like I am the eye of a storm, this body in constant motion, and then there's me, this calm, tiny, living still point. I am seated behind the forehead, just the observer. Om Shanti. So even just to have this experience of being a soul already starts to feel like there is some mastery happening, that I'm no longer out there, but I'm in this very stable place inside and very connected to my true or healthy nature of peace, of calm. So things can be happening and changing, relationships and positions and possessions coming and going as they must. Now that I am no longer thinking I am them, I am the still point observing, they don't affect me as much when they change because they must change. Everything of the physical world is temporary. It's like a law of the physical world. And so a big part of studying the self in Raj Yoga is to know I am a soul and to go very deeply into what that experience is, to spend so much time going into just that single experience, the form of myself, the features of myself, and the qualities of myself, that I am just a subtle point, I am eternal, and my true nature is peace. Would seem like that should be enough. However, whilst forgetting myself, as mentioned, we developed all these buttons, these hot spots inside of ourselves that can be triggered at any moment. And so there is an additional element that has to be addressed, which is to resolve, to remove, to melt all those hot spots. This is actually the ultimate sign of dis-ease in the human spirit. Our true nature is peace, but we don't feel very peaceful. And we've got all these trigger points inside. It's like having landmines inside the self. All of them have to be neutralized. And this is what yoga is for. Really, Raj royalty, that self sovereignty, comes the moment I experience myself to be a soul. I start to feel I am back in the driver's seat, that deep sense of calm. And it's lovely. But then suddenly something happens and I lose it all. Someone says something to me, or something happens with my day-to-day life, and suddenly I'm reacting again. It's because those landmines, those hot spots that I developed when I forgot myself are still in there. There's so many places in the world where it said these landmines have been left from some past situation. It's really quite scary. At any time they can be triggered as people walk through. So even though I'm practicing soul consciousness, as I walk through the day, at any moment, those little bombs, those hot spots inside can be triggered. So I have to neutralize all of those hot spots that developed when I forgot myself. And through yoga, yoga is designed, this union, connection is designed to dissolve or neutralize these hot spots that developed, these little landmines, buttons that developed inside the self in a state of forgetting. And the yoga that we're engaging in, believe it or not, we're all yogis, because yoga means to have a very profound link or connection or remembering of anything. I could have yoga with ice cream. I could have yoga with the past. We very often have yoga with other people, that we're constantly thinking about them, very deep relationship, remembering them. And that remembrance shapes me. So it's fine, but none of those yogas are helping to address the hot spots inside me. In fact, sometimes they're fortifying them. So I want to have yoga, this deep, deep link, connection, real relationship with a source that actually will heal the soul, resolve those buttons inside of me. And that means having yoga, because we're colored so deeply through these different unions or relationships. Having yoga with a being who doesn't have any buttons, hot spots, who is free of all landmines inside the soul. And that being is known as God in the West. Is really the supreme soul, the one soul who never forgets they're a soul, and thereby never develops these buttons inside the self. This is a being who's completely stable in peace all the time. Doesn't matter what you do, insult them, whatever, completely stable. When we say stable, it doesn't mean dead. Stable means the true nature remains intact. I'm able to respond rather than react. What is the true nature of the soul? Peaceful, loving, truthful, light, balanced, or harmonious. So that nature is always intact. Whatever comes in front of such a soul who's in that healthy state, they respond in a very loving or benevolent way. This is the Supreme Soul. So when I connect to that being accurately, that is in such a real way, I'm deeply colored by that connection, that yoga. And it actually melts away all the bits that are not really me, all those buttons inside. It heals me. And back into that healthy state, only my true nature is operating. I'm able to respond from the inside out. No buttons remain inside the self. We call this the karmatit stage, but the main thing to know is that all that reactivity is gone. So the question remains, how do I connect to such a being? I mean, yes, we've called out to God forever, it seems. It's on our radar, but it doesn't seem like that connection is really addressing the healing of the spirit. It's more a lot of setting up requisition lists and begging and praying and hoping and negotiating. And part of that is that just as we didn't really know the self, we also forgot what that being is like too. Just as I am a soul, this very subtle, peaceful, light being, the Supreme Soul has the same form, a separate being, but the same form because of being a soul. Just remains stable in that state. That's the main difference. So, again, this subtle, subtle, tiny, invisible point within which there is so much peace and so much power and so much truth and so much light. And that being retains their integrity by never coming into a body. So that being stays in a state, a realm of silence. So to conclude, let's experiment with starting to activate a pathway to connect to such a being. Sitting comfortably, eyes can be open, no tension in the body, and patiently taking time to draw my thoughts inwards. They often are wandering around in the world, thinking about different scenes and situations. But for this moment, I want to use my mind just to focus on the self, not the physical image, but really me, the soul. I am a timeless being, eternal. I travel through time, expressing through the body. And when the timeline of the body finishes, I leave the body and take rebirth in another, continuing to express, to play my part. I am completely invisible to the physical eyes, but my presence can still be felt through my personality, through what I express in the body, through my activities, through my vibration. I am very, very subtle, seated in the forehead, behind the forehead, the observer. And where do I reside when I am not in this body? I come here to play a part through the body, like a guest. But the place that feels most at home for the soul, the state that we seek, is deep peace or silence. Silence is a state where I, the soul, recharge. It's a state of letting go of everything, a state of complete truth. Because in truth, nothing of the physical realm, the temporal realm, is ever really mine. It all comes and goes. In silence, I let go of everything but a sense of self. Just aware of the self. I, this tiny spark of invisible light, but living, radiating the quality of peace. Very simple sense of self. No complications. Just a peaceful being. And in that state, in that silence, that is when I am closest to God. When it is possible to connect to that Supreme Being, the one who always resides in that silence, always beyond the physical realm. In my mind's eye, I can see the form of the Supreme Soul. It is not gross or big. A subtle, almost invisible, subtle point of light. So tiny, so quiet, and yet so powerful. From such a tiny point radiates an ocean of peace. The extremely calming effect of remembering God. This ever peaceful, ever pure being. To remember the Supreme Soul in this very true state has such a calming effect on me, the soul. Melting away all that is not me. Restoring me to a healthy, peaceful state of being. A very royal state. Simply by remembering, keeping in my mind that ever pure one, the Supreme Soul. Om Shanti. That brings us to the end of tonight's session. I don't know if there were questions from anyone, but if there is any questions, this is an opportunity. You can place it in the chat box on YouTube. And a reminder that every Tuesday in the same time slot, we do have interview with a Raj Yogi, which is where questions are posed and explored. So that's a good chance to unpack a little bit of what Raj Yoga is about. But if there's any questions tonight, please feel free to post them in the chat box. All quiet out there. Perhaps you're deep in yoga with the Supreme Soul. That's good. All right. Well, we'll end there. Thank you so much for joining. It just flies by. Our next sessions are on Saturday. We have a 1 o'clock experience meditation till 1:45. And then 2 o'clock is inner fitness, which is both lecture and experience, 2 to 3 p.m. And I believe our topic this coming Saturday is well-being. So you're most welcome to join. Until then, we will say Om Shanti and good evening. Thank you for joining tonight.